Okay, hello everyone. Nice to have you all here. Thank you for joining me. So I will start with the beginning. Yes, the call will be recorded. It is being recorded. Um, you're welcome to please leave your cameras on. I'd like to see your faces. If you shouldn't be, you won't be in the recording. Only me as a speaker will be in the recording. So, and if and you will receive the recording via email after the webinar. So no worries if you have to drop out early. Okay, and I'm Carolina. I go by Caro for short. I am the Astro Butterfly instructor for this course that's coming, and I know lots of you are new to me, so welcome to everyone. Um, I am a consulting astrologer, and I also love to teach classes and do astrology research. Um, and all of our classes tend to have different feels and flavors, and we talk, some of you are new to us, but we, cover a range of topics around self-development, tend to take a more psychological approach to astrology. Um, what else do I need to cover? It's a Western, we got a question last time. We use the tropical zodiac. It's a Western astrology orientation. Okay. And today we're here to here to talk about purpose and service. And it should be here for about an hour. That's what we've planned for. Um, the really kind of exploring this topic of purpose and service through an archetypal lens. So it's not a heavy technical astrology class. It's really about a framework around understanding purpose and its connections to archetypes. Um, so we'll be starting with looking at, this question of why this question of what's my purpose is so pervasive, really, and what some of the reasons why we struggle with this question. Um, then we'll talk about the archetypes that we link with these processes. This is a framework that we're creating and kind of help. I was just saying earlier, actually, I think one of the main gifts of astrology is helping give us frameworks and meaning and ways to understand different processes that we go through. And so here, when we say purpose stages and purpose archetypes, we're talking about these symbols and parts of the chart even that we can look at to understand this process. And then we'll talk more about the link between purpose and service through the lens. We are drawing kind of a Jungian, Carl Jung lens here. And then I'll end with introducing the purpose and service 8-week course that we're about to start. Um, so you can hang on to the end. You'll learn more about that course to see if you're interested in taking that. And there should be some time for questions at the end. Okay, so there's a lot of us here. So make sure, well, you'll be kept muted here, so because there's so much background noise, of course, and but you're by all means welcome to use the chat, and I will be asking you questions. So starting with this question, what's my purpose, right? Let me know in the chat. I mean, what do you think about when you hear this question is really what I'm asking. When you hear the word purpose, what's the first thing that comes to mind? A word, a feeling, an association, whatever comes up really with this term purpose. As a consulting astrologer, this is a question that I get all the time. Soul calling, helping others, kindness, meaning, mission. Why am I here? Right? What you're living for. Hmm. Yeah, and I see the being of service and the greater good. This is a topic, this is a term that comes up a lot with purpose. This is really why we're linking the two together as well. My task, yeah. To get to know who I am. Interesting. Why my soul decided to come here. Yeah, it's always very tied to this question of meaning fundamentally, right? Like, why are we here? What am I supposed to do? The supposed, I was put in quotes because I'm like, according to who? According to what? That's where obviously we tend to differ quite a bit, and or people have different conceptions about that. Yeah, what do I need to learn in this lifetime? Mm. Laura said, I definitely confused it with what job or career is. Yeah, this is so yeah, for me, I, you know, I this is a question, like I say, I get all the time. It's an existential question, right? A central thing that draws people to astrologers, to coaches, to therapists, right? And as we'll, talk about throughout the call, it's because it's fundamentally a question about self-knowledge, right? About connection with the self, and with the world around you. This is why it gets so tied in also, of course, with service. So this question really, it's about meaning. And so, yeah, the difficulty becomes when we um, when we think there's just a one singular answer. I think that's really that's really one of the big issues that I find myself confronting too. And so one of the things that you'll see here is that we talk about purpose as a process, and coming to understand your purpose really as a process that we go through. Okay, so these are the three reasons that we've um, pointed to here. And I'll go through each of these one by one. The first, I think, really is one of the most common, this idea of confusing purpose with career, right? Looking outside for direction. And this one really we want to focus on. This really makes the point that purpose is something that comes driven from within, right? The second one, this the idea of where people get stuck in potential, right? They feel the pull from inside, but then they don't act. Um, and then the third reason that we're talking about here today is overriding the message. This is when you act on purpose, but not necessarily from the right place, or there's this idea of the misalignment. Okay, so I'll go deeper into each of these. And most of these, most of us have struggled with all three of these at different moments in our lives. I think that's key. It's not like blah, 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 problem solved, right? It's certainly something that you'll find yourself confronting if you work with people one-on-one as an astrologer, as, in a more counseling kind of job, right? So I know a lot of people who are here in our classes are kind of in these topics. So I'm sure it's a topic that's important that you might be asking for yourself, but also in the work that you do, right? So, first one, confusing purpose with career or looking for purpose in the wrong place. And so this is when the direction isn't so clear, and so it's looked for outside, right? You'll mistake feedback, validation, status for purpose, right? And this is the classic. I mean, I think one of the number one things that happens to me when I get this question, what's my purpose? Really, people are asking about what should they do for a living? Often it's the question of, well, what should my career be? Then sometimes it turns out, how do I make money? And that's a different question even than career. So we'll muffle all things together a lot of times, right? But the problem here is where you're following someone else's map, where you're looking for this answer from outside sources without first kind of tapping in, right? You haven't formed that inner compass yet. So you're looking externally for what really can only emerge internally. And so if this one when left unresolved, it'll be constantly depending on external validation, right? Or maybe you'll get this constant changing of direction based on what looks right from the outside or what someone else tells you, or someone says, "Oh, you're good at this, you should do this," right? And really this one what we're emphasizing is that you need to come from a place of an inner call and tapping into what that inner thread is. Um, as an example, here we have Julia Child, who really, interestingly, she was a very famous, well-known TV personality cook in the US anyway. Um, and she didn't find this purpose, and actually this is and her purpose did become her career in this case, but until she was 50 years old. And before that, she had worked in government jobs and various things. And then it was in the end an inner calling and opportunities, of course, that evolved to help her make it her career. But that drove her towards cooking. She had hardly ever even cooked until shortly before she ended up going down this path. Um, but again, this idea of like, was kind of more blindly following without knowing, without tapping into what these kind of inner calls were more deeply. Here we have another example of the influencer, right? Or someone, or this idea of like, oh, I know. I see this a lot with younger people, especially, well, with my own one of my own kids anyway. Um, the the choosing of the direction based on what's popular. Oh no, okay, this is how you're supposed to make business, do a business. This is how you get rich, blah blah blah. And it's like, okay, slow down. We'll figure out first what you're drawn to, as opposed to all of these ideas that get bombarded by. So it does feel like this increasing issue in today's society that there's so much outside influence trying to tell them how to steer their lives. And the next one is this idea of being stuck in potential, right? Or the comfort of avoiding commitment, right? This is when you might feel or have a sense of what the direction is, but you don't fully step into it, right? You don't go all in, right? And this is really an issue around commitment to the inner calling, right? And the barrier here tends to be this the fact that the real issue, once it becomes real, it might succeed or fail. So staying in potential, never fully committing to the path, keeps you a little bit safe, right? This is the comfort bubble of of kind of just being in there, and it might be, oh, I'm working towards it, or I just need to take another class before I really step in there. I just, you know, this idea of, always searching a little bit more, going a little bit deeper into it, but never really taking these other steps to commit and say, okay, this is my thread, this is my path. Um, and this is, yeah, the idea that the comfort bubble feels safer than I'm someone who's chosen a direction and I'm now accountable to it, right? And so here we can have this barrier of commitment, and of not taking full action, fully getting behind the the path, right? Um, and I'm sure many of us can relate to this one at some point or the other, right? Those of us who are a part of the self-help industry in one way or the other have come across a lot of these. I mean, perhaps you're a writer who never feels their work is complete, or, never really finishes a story, or a musician who can't seem to find time to play their music, or an astrologer who doesn't do readings for others. And I'm not saying that all astrologers have to do readings for others, but I know a lot of people who don't, because they feel like they're not quite ready yet. And so there's this sense of, this is a thing that I'm really drawn to, I really feel a calling for, but a little bit more preparation's needed, more, and you just get stuck in that sense of, just flitting around with it. Um, and so here again, the core pattern is really never committing fully to the path that's calling you, right? Staying in possibility. Um, and yeah, avoiding that fear or that following your path might lead to failure or dissatisfaction. And I think it's a big one. I think this is a big one. And it really stresses that part of walking in purpose and being in integrity in that sense requires a level of vulnerability and risk taking, right? It can be a level of courage to take action. And we'll see that when we talk about the archetypes that we associate with this step as well. Um, Next, third one, overriding the message or performing a life that's not quite yours. This one tends to be the highly functional, successful by outside standards, individual who feels disconnected, right? This person is not struggling to act, but they're struggling to fully align, so it feels like it's not quite them, right? And usually I've went down this path, and maybe, it was close to a thread, but not enough time was spent on steering the compass initially, and then went all in on action, right? So whereas the previous one, not enough action, this one's like all in on the action, um, and just didn't necessarily fully trust the instinct, right? And this is, and then it's just, well, I'm already on this path. This is what makes sense. This is what works. Um, if I listen to my voice, I might have to question everything I've already created and admit that what I built isn't really mine, right? And a lot of us in these fields have come across the people who are struggling with this, and a lot of us have been in this stage at different moments. And this one really is about, again, going back to that initial calling more clearly, or a realignment. The I think that Ariana Huffington, she wrote this book not that long ago called Thrive, is quite a good example of this one. She built an extremely successful life by conventional standards, right? She was the creator of the Huffington Post, less power, achievement, but later realized it wasn't aligned with what her body and deeper instincts really were telling her, right? And so she famously collapsed from exhaustion, and then at that moment she describes that moment as this major wake-up call, where she sees that the life that she'd constructed worked externally, but it was unsustainable and disconnected internally, and that piece of the disconnection internally is really what we're focusing on here. And so again, this person, it's not someone who lacks drive or even direction necessarily. If anything, she had an abundance of it. It's that her decisions were guided by what made sense in terms of success and productivity rather than by an inner sense of balance or well-being or connection. Um, and then like I think she later pivoted towards a focus on well-being, sleep, and really this redefinition of success, which was this course correction for where she'd been, and she started to listen to the message that she had been overriding. um, and so, yeah, I mean, I want to stress here that I'm not just talking here about a career change, right? In fact, her whole awakening was precisely about the fact that success shouldn't be defined in terms of just career accomplishment, even if that career is something that you have been driving for yourself, right? It's about living more in alignment. Um, and I mean, I think this is one of the ones that I see most often with clients. A lot of people who've had quite successful careers, but at some point they realize that something is missing. And I myself went through this. Um, Often, very often, they'll come around their midlife transits. Those of you who are more familiar with transits and age groups, this is, we go through a series of transits around our late 30s, early 40s. Um, the Neptune square will bring a crisis of meaning. The Pluto square will reveal a deeper truth about the self. The Uranus opposition will give them the courage to break free. And then it becomes, okay, how do I realign? Right? And that's the key about realignment. So yeah, some people look in the wrong place. Some never stop looking and never actually take steps forward. And some people stop too early. They kind of might have had a direction and then they go all in without making spending long enough steering that ship, and then build the wrong thing and get stuck there. Um, and so those are the kind of three big reasons that we've identified. And I think the key is that here these struggles, these blockages, they correspond to uh, what we're calling a developmental sequence, okay? And really trying to get us to start thinking about purpose as something that emerges in stages rather than just, again, this singular thing that's out there to be found. And that's where we'll get into here, is this idea of those stages of purpose, and how they correspond to different archetypes. So, in our framework here, right, we're proposing to think of purpose as something that unfolds in these stages, each of which is tied to a different archetype: the fool, the hero, and the calling. And we'll see how those are linked to astrological archetypes. Some of you will be familiar with these are well, we should all be they're archetypes, so we should all be familiar somewhat with these archetypes, right? And we'll go a little bit more into them. So this is the stage one of the path towards purpose or living your purpose is the fool, right? This is that instinctive emergence into life, right? Um, this is where we move before we necessarily know why. At this stage, purpose is felt. It's not understood. It's not necessarily conscious. It's not necessarily driven by consciousness, right? And this is why the astrological signature that we're associating this with is the ascendant. Okay. And why the ascendant? Um, in in popular astrology, you'll often hear the ascendant get lumped in with the sun and the moon as one of, quote, the big three, right? Um, because they're kind of in some way personality markers. But the ascendant is actually quite a different kind of archetype than the sun and the moon because well it's not a planet for one. The ascendant is the degree of the sign that was rising on the eastern horizon at the time that you were born and at the place that you were born. So of of these are all those of you who are more beginners, these are the planets on the inside of the wheel. We've got the signs on the outside, those are the ecliptic. And the ascendant marks the start of the first house in most unequal house systems, or it marks the first house in any house system that you're in. And so it's very time and place specific to where you were born. So we might have the exact same birthday, but unless we are born in the same place and at the exact same time, our ascendants are going to differ. And then that ascendant is then what sets all of the other houses into place in your chart. So it's a very critical point in astrology. And it marks this point of emergence into the world. And so it represents the interface between us and the world, right? This place where our inner world and the outer world meet, right? Where we meet life and where life meets us. And there's a fundamentally faded quality to the ascendant. Well, to the whole chart, but the ascendant shows how we're destined to show up in the world. Okay, so the way we will orient ourselves to the world, often outside of our conscious awareness. I often say I never consciously related to my ascendant sign at all, but I can't deny that I show up in that style and in that way. So this is what I mean. It's outside of conscious awareness. The planets are our consciousness. The houses are just how we show up in this world. And the ascendant is really where we meet the world. And so, oh, there it is. So we associate it with this full stage of finding purpose because we don't will it, right? The way we show up or do our ascendant in life, it's not something that we've consciously decided to push forward. We don't consciously choose it. We often don't even know why we show up that way or understand it, right? But it simply is the way in which we enter life and the way in which life begins to shape through us. And so it has this quality of the fool. It's this fundamental way that you come into the world. And it really marks, I mean, we really see it as like the central archetype tied to purpose for that reason. And there's much more to it. I mean, there's much more archetypes and all of this that we can talk about. But if there's one that we really are focusing on in terms of purpose, it's that place where we first emerge into the world. And it also stresses what an individual and internal process this is, as we'll get into a little bit more um, as we go on in this call. Now, next we have the hero. Um, And this is the stage of conscious becoming. Okay, so this is where purpose starts to take shape through action and choice. So it's where will and direction and effort and consciousness all come much more into play. So remember, ascendant, not so much about consciousness. That's just the thread that ends up being how we show up in the world. This one is much more conscious. This is, yeah, the hero. And astrologically, we associate the hero with the planet Mars. Mars is the part of our psyche that acts, decides, and brings something into the world, right? It's one of the three personal planets. So we have the sun and the moon, those are identity. And then the personal planets are Mercury, our thoughts, Venus, our tastes, and then there's Mars, the action taker, right? The will. So this is the part of us that picks up the sword and is willing to put ourselves out there in the world, right? It's the defender of the ego, right? It's the part of us that says, no, this is me, right? Well, it's the part of us that tends to say no, or some depending on our Mars, and maybe it says too much yes and not enough no. But it defends our individuality, right? Our autonomy. That's the part of the chart that shows that. And so there we go. It's the hero, right? The archetype connected with this second stage of finding purpose, where we get up and are willing to put ourselves out there. Um, like astronomically, when we're looking at Mercury and Venus, the three personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Mars is the only one that actually goes all the way around the sun. So it's the first one that kind of journeys all out in the world. And this is why also we associate it with going out there and taking action, bringing those other personal planets out into the world, right? Um, and, again, we're not suggesting that understanding your natal Mars placement will give you the roadmap to finding your purpose, but it does show how and through what kinds of activities you tend to feel more motivated and courageous to act. So it's speaking again to a style of action, right? That would be the sign that it's in, an arena, the house that it's in, of where we tend to take action. And so it can be a really interesting placement to start looking at in terms of understanding, well, how am I meant to press forward, right? How am I meant to take action? So, like in this example, we've got Mars and Virgo in the second house, um, conjunct Jupiter. So, anyway, depending on your level of astrology, you can read more or less into it. But this is someone on a basic level that we could say takes action, Mars, in a Virgo way, in a detail-oriented way, by making small, realistic adjustments that are useful, Virgo. That's part of their purpose, right? It's the way they drive themselves forward through the world. And yeah, and this is the chart of a friend of mine who is a coach, and well, I remember when she first started her business, she was renowned for giving people way too many assignments. But really focusing on like lots of little adjustments and ideas of like everyday changes that they could make. And she herself built her business through writing and through this kind of very practical style of advice, which really encompassed that Virgo quality, as well as the aspects that it makes to the rest of her chart. And again, it's the resources that it's the style of drive that we can draw on in our life. The hero. And finally, the third stage of purpose is the calling, right? This is where the personal path opens into something greater. Okay, so where purpose becomes more clear through experience, um, purpose stops feeling like a solo journey and starts feeling like alignment with a direction. So it doesn't the calling doesn't replace the previous stages, right? It includes them. So we're still the same fool, right? Who entered life with this unique orientation, and the same hero who shaped that orientation through action. But now that path begins to reveal a deeper coherence and direction. And that's this stage where it's more focused on alignment, I would say, right? And it's a stage where we feel like, oh, this is what all that was for, maybe, or this is the direction that actually feels more like me. You feel more pulled in a certain way. And so I'd say, the calling, it's where our path begins to extend into something greater. Um, and and so purpose stops being as personal, right? It's still ours, but it's not as self-contained, we feel again more pulled, more driven. And so it's a stage where you're connecting more and more to meaning, I would say, and more into the next stage that we'll talk about when we go into service. Um, and here we're looking as it's the principal astrological signature, the lunar nodes. This is the south node and the north node. You guys will know those as. Now, these are points. They're always opposite one another in your chart. And they show this ongoing mechanism of identity development and adjustment. There is a directionality to them. We go from the south node to the north node. You'll usually talk about, you'll hear talked about as the south node as where your soul has come from, and the north where it's headed in this lifetime. But we really like to emphasize the nodes as identity archetypes, okay, as these points that help us, adjust our sense of self. After all, they're astronomical points that are derived by the intersection of the sun and the moon's path. So they're, innately, linked to both the sun and the moon, which are our two identities. And because they're in opposition, they show this ongoing mechanism of identity development and adjustment, where we continue to evolve in relation to this broader nodal direction. So, I mean, I do always like to stress that our nodal direction doesn't just mean abandoning our south node for the promises of our north node. It's a process of integration of the whole axis. At some points in life, this means stressing the gifts of our south node. At others, it's taking the leap towards our north node, even if we don't feel as capable in it. And it's this process of back and forth that helps with the development and the understanding of our identity and therefore our purpose. So, um, yeah, I think that's a big thing that I like to stress. It's not just this unidirectional thing. And you'll find, in fact, when we're talking here about purpose and service and callings, and especially the stage of seeing the bigger thing, the moments in time when we come to these realizations, often we're in nodal transits. The classic nodal transit, like eclipses are nodal transits. So when we have eclipses, those are the nodes. Or when we have eclipses touching our chart, those are nodes that are transiting our chart. Um, and these are moments where things get revealed to us about our calling, about this larger purpose, the calling. There it is. And so, yeah, this is the same chart of the friend, that I've been showing. There's the Mars and Virgo. And when she moved into, when she did leave the career that she had been in, um, she was in a nodal transit. She was in an eclipse that she was experiencing. And interesting, it wasn't just about diving into this Virgo North node. It was very much about the integration of the Pisces South node as well. Like she ended up doing a spiritual business was the drive that she went towards. So it was this process of using those Virgo gifts, but also the stuff that came much more innately to her, which was symbolized by that South node in Pisces. So um, really interesting to go back and look also in your own life moments of nodal transits and your own relationship to your nodes. Okay, so those are the main three main archetypes that we're associating with purpose and those that are linked in their astrological links. The Fool, the Hero, and the Calling. And I won't go all into this one, but we want you to think about them as developmental layers that build on each other. Okay, so each stage revealing a different dimension of purpose. So the important thing I think really to remember is that purpose is something that's lived, right? We've all been on different parts of this continuum. We may identify more strongly with one of them at a given time or move between them across different phases of life, but all three are really part of the same process, right? So we start with the Fool stage, that instinctive emergence into life, where we move instinctively without necessarily knowing why. From there, we need to develop the courage to become our own hero, right? This is where many of us might get caught in the zone of fear and excuses. You might keep circling potential, right, to stay safe, like we talked about. You might not move. But the hero stage, that threshold is then what gets you through there, and that's where you start acting, building, developing skills, even without full clarity sometimes, but you're now in that learning zone, right? And it's only once you've actually moved and engaged with life, gone through that learning zone also, that you start to reach that calling threshold where you're able to enter the growth zone. That's where purpose isn't something you're trying to figure out anymore. It's something that starts to become clear because you've already stepped into it, and it starts to feel more like this tug, this alignment. And this is where, this growth zone, right? This is where we're able to face challenges more head on and live in that greater sense of alignment. Okay, so taking it back to these, three reasons why we struggle with purpose, you can see that in the first case, when we lack the connection to the fool's instinct, then we find ourselves looking for purpose in the wrong place, right? Externally, right? And so this is when the fool is being bypassed in some sense. The second one, where you're stuck in potential, this is where you're kind of stuck in the fool. The fool stage, it's not been fully completed. You're just kind of you're in it, but you're not walking into the hero stage yet, right? And then the overriding the message here, okay, you kind of galloped through the fool a little bit too quickly, probably, and then went all in on the hero, and then stuck more in the hero and finding yourself at that threshold of calling and might have to do a course correction there. And that's kind of the way that we're conceptualizing these. Okay, so which of these three stages do you most identify with right now? I think that we've all been in different moments of these. Um, Let me know. I'm gonna take a little pause here. Calling now. Just gonna pause to take a little look at some comments here. I see some questions here, kind of more technical. What if the ascendant or Mars or nodes are an aspect to each other? And really, we're not trying to take this too literally. It's not like we're going to dissect the chart and figure out that nugget of truth. Here, we're really talking about the archetypes from well, the astrological placements from an archetypal lens, what Mars represents, what ascendant represents, and they'll all give you clues and information about how you function and where you are in these different layers. But it's really not about doing a deep analysis of their specific relationship to one another. I mean, we can do that later on, but I don't want to take that detour here, certainly. A lot. So yeah, a lot of people in the calling, like I say, I do think that that calling can be one that a lot of us come to around middle age or afterwards, right? That sense of, okay, how can I take it one step farther? Hero, but dipping my toes into calling. Great. I see another question. Can we have more than one purpose? Um, yeah, I mean, that's a thing. I think purpose by definition is not a singular thing. It's not a thing even. It's a process. It's a process of living more in alignment with yourself. So that's actually what I'll get into a little bit more here by talking a little bit more about the psychological kind of underpinnings of how we're thinking about purpose. Um, so we're here talking about purpose and service. We've been last fall we started a program called Transform Your Life with Astrology, and where we talked about addiction and shadow as well. And all of these are following Carl Jung's kind of framework around individuation. So in here, we're really getting to the meat of his theories of individuation, because according to Carl Jung, the purpose of life is to achieve individuation, which is this process of becoming your true, authentic self by integrating the conscious and the unconscious mind, including the shadow, right? And so, from this perspective, purpose is found in the process of self-realization, right? Of growing into the person, okay, you're meant to be, rather than just adhering to social masks, which is the persona, or your shadow again. So he famously said, we must what is it? We must divest the self of false wrappings. And I think that's the quote. This idea that, only then are we able to really see ourselves for who we are and step into the process of finding our purpose. And again, he talks about it as this process of finding purpose as well. So when we understand that, you see that purpose is something that's rooted in who we are. It's not at something external to be found, right? It's not this quest to find the right career, or figuring out what you're going to gain notoriety for, or what will be applauded the most, right? It becomes this process of uncovering, of living and expressing who we are naturally. And it can be through our work and through our relationships, through many different sectors of our lives, right? That's all of that process makes up purpose. So it's fundamentally about identity, and very importantly, about finding meaning in the process of living our own unique selves. So, and for Carl Jung as well, purpose was, deeply intertwined with service. This is key to also helping us find meaning in our lives. So, in terms of the connection between the two, we really want to think of service as something where that emerges from purpose. It's where purpose becomes useful to others, where purpose gets externalized a little bit more, right? Where it gets taken more into the public realm. And the key is that without clarity of purpose, we're going to struggle with service, right? So here, if you're stuck before the fool, or where the fool is bypassed, we will never find authentic service, right? It just won't lead to that process, right? Because you're not authentically already within yourself. If the fool was never completed, if you're stuck in that stage, then there's no service because you're not taking action, right? And then if you're in the overriding the message um, pitfall, then your service is misaligned, right? And so, sure, you might be of service, but it's not the authentically part that you're here meant to bring into the world, right? Now, both purpose and service are fundamentally about how you as an individual show up. So, but first, purpose is the source, service is the expression. And this idea here that purpose without service, it's going to stay just as potential, right? While service without purpose can feel empty, mechanical. And it's only with the alignment of the two that we start to experience the stronger sense of meaning. And so here we want to start looking in terms of the chart. We'll come back to it now. I mean, this idea that both purpose and service are centered around the I am, but from different angles. Okay. And so this brings us back to the ascendant, right? The I am corresponds to the ascendant, the point through which we enter that world. Now, the ascendant's area of influence is the eastern hemisphere of the chart, right? The right side of the chart. So this is the ascendant is where the sun rises every day. It's the horizon, right? Below the horizon is the personal embedded part of us, right? This is the first quadrant in astrology. It represents you. That is the quadrant of your chart that really fundamentally is about how you as an individual show up from this personally driven place. And then above the horizon, this is where this whole side of the chart, this top part of the chart, this is where we have the external public world, right? But on the eastern side and the top, this is the fourth quadrant, and it represents the world out there, but specifically how you engage with the world, right? Because we're on the eastern side still. And so if we map this on to service and purpose, service is the fourth quadrant, purpose is the first quadrant, right? Because purpose is coming from that personal, individual, embedded, subjective side. And that's why you kind of have to go there first. While service corresponds archetypally, to that fourth quadrant, and it's the daylight or outward expression of purpose, right? And so the key really becomes aligning the two, right? Both are self-driven, both on the eastern side of the chart, but purpose is about the process of internal self-discovery, this developmental process, while service is about putting it out there in the world. Here, a little astrological detour. I mean, you'll find that often, transits to the ascendant can show this crisis of purpose is the way that I've called it here. Hold on, I just realized that. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. I suddenly lost you. So this is, you'll find that when we go through transits to the ascendant, we'll experience this, this crisis of purpose. And so we look out especially for bigger transits like Saturn transits or Uranus transits, outer planet transits, Neptune transits, Pluto transits to the ascendant. These are, and the big change makers are the transits that are conjunctions, so that go right over the ascendant, or that square that come 90 degrees to the ascendant, or that oppose the ascendant, so that I go on this side. Those are the ones really where you'll find you'll have these moments of, hold on, what is my purpose? And I have to, how can I change course a little bit? So this one here again is the same chart that we were looking at before of this friend who was, I told you she was in corporate America, and she was a writer and an editor, very successful in, again, corporate career. But, and it was, I met her while she was in a Pluto transit to her son, now that I remember. And she had this, very level-headed Capricorn style of person, but she decided to enter this coaching program to start to explore more her calling, or a sense of feeling more aligned in her work. But it was interesting because about a year later, as she was coming to the end of the coaching certification, um, Uranus kind of droop aligned right to the top of her chart. I remember at the time seeing that. And that when you've got a planet exactly at the top of your chart, that's a 90-degree transit to your ascendant. That's an exact square to your ascendant. Um, and that that's when she decided to quite suddenly quit her corporate job and go all in on her private business as a more spiritually driven coach. So it was and again, she had been in other transits, and of course, and I say of course because rarely our life direction changes that big, marked by just a single transit. So this Uranus transit, had been preceded by a Pluto one. I told you she had had eclipses on her sun as well. So there are other things that were kind of kicking her in. Neptune was opposite that Mars of taking action. Um, but it was the Uranus transit to the ascendant that brought okay, that's it. I can't continue to live out of alignment. And that's kind of a more typical transit to the ascendant, I think. So, and you can hear also that had both an effect on her inner sense of purpose, because of that's the start of that quadrant down there, but also with her service work, because I mean, she took it out into her world. I mean, in her case, the transit was coming from the top of the chart. So, but also, I think that's key. The ascendant, even though it is the start of the purpose quadrant, it does kind of it links the two quadrants, right? Of purpose and service. And so it bridges both purpose and service as well. Okay, so going back now to purpose and service, again, just this idea that purpose is the inner work and service the outer expression. And so while we associate the unfolding of purpose with those three archetypes of the fool, the hero, the calling, we can think of service as being tied to the three houses of the fourth quadrant. So the 10th house, which is your work, the 11th house, which we can think of as your people or your community, how you're going to bring it out there into the world, and the 12th, which is more your legacy. Um, and together, these give us a way to understand the way we live out our purpose. And again, you'll notice I say you'll live out your purpose rather than necessarily find that singular purpose. Remembering that it's about awareness and individuation, and it's a process, right? Not a single thing you do, it's a thread that you follow over the course of your life. And as you follow this thread, you go through the Fool, the Hero, the Calling, then you walk into service, right? Through your work, through your finding your community, and then through understanding your legacy. So, yeah, living our purpose is the thread and giving back to the world. Service is the gift. That's the sequence of the process that we're kind of highlighting here. Okay, and that sequence is what we want to explore, what we'll be exploring more in our 8-week program here on purpose and service. So if you want to explore more deeply, you should join us, of course, for this new course. And we'll dive deeper into both these frameworks and, well, get a lot more astrological. Those are some of the archetypes we talked about that we'll be exploring in more detail. But I really think that the key thing to think about in terms of the course and that we want to emphasize here is that we're looking to guide, create a process of guiding us through this process. It's not even primarily a technical astrology course. It's a course where we're using astrology as archetypes to help us understand these deeper processes. Um, that path of exploration of purpose and service. And so throughout, looking at those 6 stages, the 6-step process, and each module of the courses, we're looking really to help us identify these different, have little outcomes or little things that we're looking to identify. So with the Fool, we're looking at identifying what that thread is. With the Hero, looking at how you step forward or how you take action into it. When we look at the Calling here, we're looking more at, okay, the kind of larger terrain, the larger context, where the terrain really where this is unfolding. Then we go into the service ones, and there it's looking more specifically at an offering. Um, Here we have with the 11th house, my people, we have the outcome is avatar. This is really the idea of creating this ideal image of what kind of community is suited for the offering. Um, and then the 6th one is more the legacy or the gift, the thing that's more left behind. So these are kind of some of the ways that we're thinking about it in terms of what we're looking to do as part of the course. And yeah, so this is the general outline of the program. Um, each each section, purpose, has 3 modules. Then we'll have a week break in between them, and then service has 3 modules. And so kind of follows the logic that we were talking about here. That's the general framework that we'll be using throughout. And again, each module has that structure of where there'll be a live call, um, exercises, reflections. I mean, those of you who've taken courses with us have a sense of that we do more than just the astrological technique. It's usually various exercises to help us digest the material and build towards that complete personal map of how your purpose wants you to move in the world. There's the link if you want to sign up. And if I hope to see you all starting next week when we start the course. And if not, I hope to see you again in some other opportunity. So thank you for joining us.